Hey guys, tonight we're starting our journey in a place you've probably never asked to go. A dark, damp, echoing tunnel buried beneath the bustling feet of ancient Rome. The walls are slick with time. The scent? Let's just say it's distinct. Water trickles somewhere far off and something. Rat? Ghost? Ancient urinal sponge? Scurries past your sandal. Yes, your sandal. You're here now, in full toga and questionable hygiene, ready to explore the unsung marvel that kept the Roman Empire from drowning in its own filth. The Cloaca Maxima. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your walk along the ancient Via Sacra, winding your way through the Forum Romanum, past crumbling columns and lingering ghosts of philosophers. It's a sleepy night in the capital of the ancient world. Lantern light flickers, and the air hangs heavy with moisture. Somewhere beneath your feet, a slow and steady current whispers through tunnels older than Julius Caesar's ego. You're headed there now, deep below. The Cloaca Maxima, or greatest sewer, begins its reign not in engineering textbooks but as a humble drainage canal, carved by brute force and ambition during Rome's early days, when the city was more swamp than splendor. Originally constructed in the 6th century BCE, likely under King Tarquinius Priscus, who, fun fact, may or may not have even existed, historians still argue whether he was a real king or a myth wrapped in pipes. It began as a practical way to drain the marshes between the hills. But oh, how it grew. Picture yourself stepping into its yawning mouth near the Tiber River. The air shifts. It's cooler down here, and it smells like a 1,000-year-old soup someone forgot to stir. Overhead, arching stonework glistens with condensation. The tunnel is surprisingly tall. You can stand upright, though you might not want to breathe too deeply. Your footsteps slap softly on the damp stone floor, echoing into the abyss. The water beside you, yes, that gentle trickling stream, is a diluted cocktail of rain runoff, fish bones, olive oil, ash, and whatever your Roman neighbors flushed down the latrines this week. As in everything. Above ground, Rome is marble and firelight. Below, it's a network of arteries carrying the literal lifeblood of the city, gray, murky, and mildly toxic, and yet weirdly elegant. The engineering is astounding. This wasn't just a trench. It was a vaulted tunnel, lined with massive stone blocks so perfectly placed that parts of the original Cloaca Maxima are still functioning today. Somewhere in Rome, someone flushed a toilet, and it may have just passed under your imaginary feet. Modern engineers sometimes joke that it takes more to maintain today's plumbing than it did to keep this ancient monster flowing. And they're not entirely wrong. You press onward, guided only by torchlight and a vague sense that if you trip here, you'll be tasting ancient garum sauce for the rest of eternity. The walls are mossy. Above, tiny fissures let in filtered moonlight like watery stars. Every so often, you pass branching corridors, smaller tunnels that snake out beneath temples, bathhouses, even the Circus Maximus. It's all connected. The city was literally built on top of its own refuse. And here's a fun tidbit. For centuries, no one really owned the Cloaca Maxima. It wasn't guarded or controlled, it just worked. Rome expanded, emperors rose and fell, but the sewer? It flowed. You could almost imagine it humming beneath the sandals of senators and slaves alike. Some ancient sources claim that fish used to swim upstream from the Tiber into the cloaca. That's a terrible visual, yes, but also speaks to how well constructed the system was. The slope of the tunnels allowed for constant flow without modern pumps. Gravity, baby, nature's plumber. At one point, you pause to touch the wall just for a moment. The stone is slick and cold. You half expect it to pulse. It doesn't. Still, you can feel the weight of centuries pressing down. This tunnel outlived Caligula's party palace, Nero's golden mansion, even the baths of Caracalla. Sewers are, in their way, eternal. But don't get too poetic. There's something squishy ahead. You step around it carefully. Best not to investigate. As you trudge deeper, The trickle becomes a gurgle, then a lazy, ominous rush. Somewhere far ahead, water from a collapsed aqueduct pours into the channel. You hear it before you see it. A roaring, echoing splash that sends a breeze of sulfur your way. Delicious. Now, imagine being the poor soul sent down here during maintenance duty. No protective boots, no air filters, just a tunic, a rope, and a vague prayer to Cloacina, Rome's goddess of the sewer. Yes, she's real. Or was. Or might have been. Historians still argue whether she was a legitimate deity or a sanitation-based pun that got wildly out of hand. Still, Roman religion was nothing if not practical. You've got gods for war, gods for wine, gods for door hinges, and of course one for human waste. It's oddly comforting, really. You continue walking. There's a bend ahead. The tunnel narrows slightly. The ceiling dips. You crouch. For a moment, you wonder what would happen if it collapsed right now. You're in a 2,500-year-old sewer, after all. But then, aha! You spot a faint carving in the stone. Latin worn by centuries of splashback. A worker's mark? A bored teenager? A warning? You'll never know. But it's one more whisper from the past, buried in brick and damp and time. You step over a puddle that might have been here since the Republic. Your torch sputters. The scent shifts again. Darker, older, richer with whatever fermented horrors were entombed here when Rome burned or was sacked. Yes, the Cloaca Maxima was not immune to the tides of history. It has carried not just waste, but ash from fires, floodwater from disasters, and perhaps even the bones of the forgotten. A battlefield of bacteria and time, but still it flows, and so do you, deeper into the belly of the beast, your feet leading you through a history no one ever brags about. You're a sewer tourist now, an unsanctioned, sandal-wearing time traveler. And guess what? You haven't even hit the worst-smelling part yet. You inch forward, your footsteps becoming more tentative as the floor beneath you squelches ever so slightly. The Cloaca Maxima doesn't scream for attention. It murmurs, in steady, sloshing syllables. Somewhere in the depths, you pass a tangle of ancient roots creeping through the stone like slow-motion tentacles. They've been growing for centuries, uninterrupted. You duck as one grazes your hair. It smells faintly of mildew and despair. But above ground, the real magic or madness was happening in full view. Let's talk Roman bathrooms. Or rather, the complete, shameless lack of privacy. You emerge from the sewer for a breath of, well, not fresh, but less humid air, and find yourself in a public latrina. Not a single stall door in sight. Just a long stone bench with evenly spaced keyhole-shaped cutouts. The business seats, if you will. Below that bench, a constant stream of water carries everything away. Eventually, you sit. Not by choice. Someone in a toga is glaring at you, and apparently it's rude to hover. You glance left, eye contact. You glance right, more eye contact. This is somehow worse than the sewer. There's no toilet paper, of course. Instead, a communal sponge on a stick, known as a tersorium, awaits your contribution. It rests in a shallow gutter of running water in front of the latrine seats, to be dipped, used, and returned. Yes, returned. You try not to think about how many people have handled it before you. You try harder not to think about how many diseases it probably handled before them. This entire system, though shocking by modern standards, actually served a larger purpose. Public latrines were social hubs, part gossip column, part city sanitation, part community bonding. Because nothing says friendship like synchronized bowel movements. And it wasn't just about function. Some latrines were ornately decorated with frescoes and mosaics depicting, you guessed it, potty jokes. Others were attached to bathhouses, where the ancient Romans would cleanse, soak, and sweat, having already done their most unspeakable business. But don't be fooled by the clever water flow and marble seats. These places stank. The Cloaca Maxima carried waste away, but not instantly. The smell lingered. Flies lingered. Sometimes even critters lingered. Rats? Sure. But the occasional snake slithering through the drainage system wasn't unheard of. Imagine that surprise mid-conversation with your neighbor about gladiator rumors. Still, this primitive plumbing was revolutionary. In a time when much of Europe relied on chamber pots tossed from windows, Rome had flowing water, organized waste channels, and designated relief stations. They even had laws about where and where not to relieve oneself. Public urination, fined. Using a sacred place as a toilet, serious offense. Emperor Vespasian, in fact, once imposed a urine tax. And yes, that's as weird as it sounds. He taxed the collection of urine from public urinals, which was used in tanning leather and laundering togas. You don't want to know how. When his son Titus complained, Vespasian supposedly held a coin under his nose and said, "Money does not stink, pecunia non olet." Classic dad joke. Historians still argue whether that quote was ever actually spoken, or if it was just too good to pass up. You glance around this latrine and marvel at the efficiency and the awkwardness. There's no privacy, no flushing mechanism, and yet somehow it worked. Rome's obsession with order extended even to its waste. Water channels diverted runoff from aqueducts to help carry sewage through the cloaca. Engineers calculated slopes, built catch basins, and installed manholes, all with no computers, no blueprints, just math, muscle, and probably a lot of trial and error. Speaking of error, imagine being the guy who tested the first tersorium. "Hey Lucius, try this and let us know if you survive." You head back toward the sewer entrance, past a crumbling fresco of Neptune holding a sponge like a trident. Artistic liberty, probably, but you admire the effort. Nearby, a faded inscription warns against relieving oneself too close to the temple walls. You consider the implications. Even in the ancient world, someone had to make a rule because someone else already broke it. And that's the hidden poetry of Roman sanitation. It wasn't just marble and mosaics. It was boundaries. It was dignity. It was figuring out how to make city life sustainable in a world where cleanliness was a luxury. Down the road, you hear a boy hawking olive oil near a bathhouse. A dog lifts its leg on a column. A senator strides past, pinching his toga so it doesn't drag through yesterday's puddles. And beneath it all, always, the cloaca hums. Back in the sewer, you pause at a grated opening in the ceiling. Light trickles in. A splash echoes from a distant tunnel. It's easy to forget that for many, this place was more than infrastructure, it was survival. The flow of waste, strange as it sounds, meant health, meant prosperity. A working sewer meant fewer diseases, cleaner streets, and safer drinking water. Not perfect, but better than the alternatives. You continue walking, the stone floor now slanting downward. Your torch casts long shadows, flickering against brick that has survived invasions, revolutions, and thousands of Romans asking, where does all of it go? The answer, as you've seen, is right beneath your feet, and it's taking you further still. You adjust your toga slightly. It started clinging to your legs from the damp, and the air grows cooler as you wind deeper through the tunnel. The walls shift subtly. The color of the stone changes, the angle of the slope flattens out, and suddenly you're walking through a part of the cloaca that feels older, quieter, more ancient than ancient Rome itself. Because here's the secret that most people, especially sleepy YouTube listeners like you, don't know. Rome didn't invent the Cloaca Maxima. No, before Rome was Rome, before legions and laurels and Latin, this land was the home of a mysterious civilization. The Etruscans. The Etruscans lived in central Italy and laid the foundation, literally and culturally, for much of what the Romans would later claim as their own. You can think of them as the cool, artsy neighbor whose patio Rome copied, expanded, and then conquered. The Etruscans built early roads, temples, and, yes, primitive drainage canals in the valleys that would one day become the Roman Forum. So when the early Roman kings, especially that possibly mythical guy Tarquinius Priscus, decided to drain the marshy lowlands to build a city worthy of stories, they weren't starting from scratch. They were upgrading someone else's plumbing. Typical Romans. Historians still argue whether the original Cloaca Maxima was simply an expanded Etruscan drainage ditch or a completely new construction built on top of Etruscan foundations. Either way, the bones of that older civilization still lie beneath the city, tucked beneath centuries of stone, sewage, and empire building. And as you walk, you spot one of those bones, figuratively. A row of stone blocks along the left wall is clearly different. Rougher hewn, older, placed with a slightly different logic. They lean at awkward angles and some bear strange carvings, swirling patterns not Latin, not Greek. Etruscan. Most Romans didn't speak the Etruscan language, and it still confounds modern scholars. It's not quite Indo-European, not quite anything else. A linguistic orphan. It shows up in tombs and fragments and on the sides of ancient sewer bricks, as if someone long ago wanted to whisper into the future. We were here first. You brush your fingers across one of the carvings and imagine the mason who set it in place. Shirtless, sunburnt, probably annoyed that the Romans were rebranding his drainage project. Above your head, water from the forum area seeps through ancient limestone filters. It's quiet here. There's no rushing river, no fresh waste, just a steady dampness and the sound of your breath. For a moment, time blurs. You're standing where civilizations overlapped, layered like lasagna, Etruscan, Roman Republic, Roman Empire, medieval Rome, modern Rome. And somehow, this sewer tunnel runs through them all. Quirky fact: Etruscans were surprisingly spiritual about water. They believed in sacred springs and underground rivers that carried the voices of the dead. So their drainage systems may not have been purely practical. They may have been ritualistic. Imagine building a sewer not just to carry away filth, but to keep the spirits below from rising up. Plumbing and exorcism, bundled in one stone groove. You move onward and find yourself in a wider chamber, an ancient junction point. The smell here is somehow worse and better at the same time, like mildew mixed with vintage incense. You look up and see the sky through a grating that might have once been part of the Velabrum, an ancient marketplace built over this very artery. Traders up there once haggled over dates and figs while waste trickled below. You wonder if they ever realized what they were standing on. Here's the thing: Romans didn't just build on top of the past. They built around it, absorbed it, and in true Roman fashion, named it after themselves anyway. The word cloaca may sound Roman, but it may have its roots in Etruscan terms for underground flow. Scholars debate it like everything else. The Romans weren't always original, they were efficient recyclers of good ideas. You round another corner and see where this old section of the tunnel meets newer construction. The stonework becomes smoother, cleaner, still ancient but more refined. It's like stepping from a cave into a cathedral of sewage. The transition is subtle, but unmistakable. Back in the Republic, when Rome started growing faster than it could manage, this very intersection became crucial. Engineers, taking notes from the Greeks and those Etruscans, widened the tunnels, deepened the flow, and added a brilliant little invention: inspection shafts. That's right. Roman sanitation engineers were crawling down here 2 millennia ago to check for blockages and make repairs. And they did it with torches, ropes, and sheer grit. Imagine the job listing. Wanted, flexible, fearless, immune to both rats and existential dread. Must enjoy darkness and limited oxygen. And yet these unsung laborers kept the system alive, feeding stormwater from the hills into the main arteries, channeling runoff through slope-calculated gradients, and silently saving the city from drowning in its own bathwater. Literally, you pass a rusted metal plaque, modern, bolted into the ancient wall. It marks the point where a team of 19th century archaeologists, Italian, British, probably sweaty, re-entered the Cloaca Maxima for the first time in centuries. They documented, measured, and, predictably, argued over what was Roman and what was Etruscan. Some even took pieces home, as souvenirs, because nothing says fun trip to Rome like a pocket-sized stone from a 2,600-year-old sewer. You chuckle softly. The echo carries. A rat chitters somewhere in the dark. You whisper salve to it, just in case it's the reincarnation of some ancient city planner. Then, as you continue, you begin to hear a low rumble, far off, like thunder trapped underground. The tunnel bends again. The cloaca widens, and ahead, the faint smell of the Tiber grows stronger. You're nearing the river, but for now, the layers beneath your feet whisper of the forgotten, the buried, the reused. Civilizations may rise and fall, but sewage finds a way. And now, even in the bowels of history, someone else built the first brick. The walls widen around you, and the ceiling arches higher, giving you room to stretch your back and ease the crick forming in your neck. You're walking through a part of the Cloaca Maxima that feels confident, polished, like the sewer knows it has earned its place as the backbone of the greatest city in the ancient world. Rome is above you, in all its chaotic, triumphal glory. Senators are strutting across marble forums. Legionnaires are clanking down cobbled roads. Bakers are cursing their ovens, and someone's amphora has just tipped over and shattered for the third time today. But none of that happens without this, the invisible skeleton of it all. Because here's the dirty little secret. Rome was built on its sewer system. Not metaphorically, literally. The forum, the marketplaces, the temples. They all rest on land that was once a swamp, drained only through the persistent flow of the Cloaca Maxima. Without it, there would have been no stable foundations for anything. Rome's golden buildings would have sunk into the muck like a dropped sandal in a latrine. As you walk, water rushes gently beside you in a trough about waist-high, following a smooth gradient that's been measured by engineers wearing tunics instead of lab coats. The precision is eerie. You almost expect a Roman surveyor to step out of the shadows and adjust your posture. No, you must walk at a 2.5-degree slope. For drainage. The truth is, Rome had one of the most advanced sanitation systems in the ancient world. By the height of the Republic and into the Empire, the city boasted over 1,000 public fountains, 11 aqueducts, and hundreds of miles of underground drainage. Water flowed from distant mountains through the aqueducts into neighborhoods, fountains, baths, and yes, into sewers. But here's the kicker. Most of that water wasn't for drinking. It was for cleaning, for flushing, for washing the filth off an ever-growing city that, by some accounts, housed over 1 million people at its peak. That's a lot of sponge sticks. The Cloaca Maxima absorbed it all. Rainwater, kitchen slop, industrial waste from tanning shops, blood from butcher stalls, the contents of chamber pots dumped in alleyways, even the runoff from public baths, loaded with soap, sweat, and questionable oils. And Rome was proud of it. Emperors didn't just fund sewer expansions, they bragged about them. Coins were minted with depictions of aqueduct arches. Plaques announced improvements to storm drains. One emperor even had a monument inscribed with the number of sewers he had personally ordered cleared out, which raises some questions about his hobbies. You pause at a junction where 3 smaller tunnels merge into one larger artery. The acoustics are strange here. Your footsteps bounce back at you with ghostly precision. Above the junction is a carved relief, barely legible after centuries of water erosion. It's a pair of crossed tools, likely shovels, and a stylized river god. Possibly Tiberinus, possibly just someone having a really bad bath day. Despite its grandeur, the sewer wasn't glamorous. The people who worked down here weren't the ones giving speeches on the Senate floor. They were laborers, slaves, and low-level engineers known as cloacini, a title that sounds elegant until you remember what it entails. They descended with torches, cleared blockages, and repaired collapsed walls, all without modern equipment. Sometimes they even retrieved valuables accidentally flushed down the system. Rings, coins, sandals, lots of sandals, and even teeth. Sewer archaeology is weirdly full of teeth. No one talks about it. You step over a puddle that gleams with a faint sheen. Oil? Soap? Something worse? Better not to investigate. Up ahead, a narrow stone bridge arches over the channel. On it, a thin groove marks the centuries of footsteps that wore it down. Proof that even in this subterranean world, traffic existed. Modern historians marvel at the system's durability. The Cloaca Maxima is over 2,500 years old and still partially in use. Even today, storm drains in parts of central Rome feed into this ancient tunnel. Engineers occasionally send down inspection drones, which, no joke, have captured footage of catfish the size of small dogs lazily gliding through the flow. One drone caught a catfish eating another catfish. You can't make this up. And yes, scholars still argue whether any of these fish are descended from the mythical ones mentioned in Roman texts, the ones said to live their whole lives in the sewers, fattened by olive oil and ancient offal. Probably not. But then again, this is Rome. You pause to listen. Above, muffled footsteps echo from the surface. You're directly beneath the Forum Boreum, the ancient cattle market. For centuries, animals were herded, bought, and slaughtered there, right above your head. And guess where the waste went? Down here. Of course. It's not romantic. It's not heroic. But it's deeply Roman. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just infrastructure, it was ideology. Control the city, control the water. Direct the flow of waste, and you direct the flow of life. Clean streets, reliable water, proper drainage, it kept the capital breathing. Without it, Rome would have collapsed under its own weight and stench. You continue walking. The passage narrows, the stone grows darker. A faint scratching echoes ahead. Rat? Wind? Lost archaeologist? You decide not to find out. As you press on, you marvel at how seamlessly this dirty, dark, and uncelebrated place was woven into the grandeur of the Roman world. The Senate may have debated policy, the legions may have conquered distant lands, but none of it would have meant a thing without someone, somewhere, keeping this sewer flowing. And now, so are you. You pause at another fork in the tunnel, the gentle rush of water lapping at your sandals. Left path? Right path? Both smell equally terrible, so really it's a coin toss. You pick the left, mostly because the air feels slightly warmer. That could mean less sewage, or more methane. Let's hope for the former. As you continue, the walls press in tighter, the space narrowing. You duck your head instinctively. A thick vein of mineral buildup runs along the ceiling, centuries of calcified runoff leaving their ghostly trails. You reach out and touch the edge. It flakes under your fingers like ancient chalk. This is history crumbling in your hand. And it's not glamorous. It's functional. And that's kind of the whole point. The Cloaca Maxima didn't exist to be admired. It existed to keep Rome alive. And not metaphorically, medically. Because while the ancients didn't exactly have microscopes or germ theory, they did notice something important. Bad smells and standing filth made people sick. They called it miasma or bad air. And while their understanding of bacteria was non-existent, their instinct to remove waste from living spaces was dead on. So let's take a little detour. Above ground, Rome faced serious health problems as its population ballooned to well over 1 million people. That's a staggering number, especially when most cities of the time barely scratched 100,000. And with big numbers come big, biological consequences. Waste disposal wasn't just about dignity, it was about survival. Human waste, animal waste, industrial waste, all of it had to go somewhere, and preferably not right where you lived. So they did the smart thing. They flushed it into the sewers. Even homes of the moderately wealthy had simple plumbing. Clay pipes that emptied into a neighborhood drain, which connected to the larger sewers, which all fed into, you guessed it, the Cloaca Maxima. Rainwater helped keep things flowing. And Roman engineers, with their talent for gradients and gravity, designed everything to move steadily downhill toward the Tiber River. Now, was this system perfect? Absolutely not. Pipes clogged. Rats multiplied. Latrines overflowed during floods. But compared to the rest of the world at the time, Rome was astonishingly clean. Public health officials, known as aediles, patrolled the streets to ensure sanitation standards. If you dumped trash outside your home, they'd fine you. If your latrine leaked into the road, you could be reported. There's even evidence that Rome had something like a public works hotline. Residents could submit complaints about blocked drains and overflowing gutters. Imagine a toga-clad bureaucrat, quill in hand, scribbling down. Via Appia sewer smells like goat again. Investigate. And guess what? It worked. For a while anyway. Despite the crowding and questionable sponge protocols, Rome suffered fewer major disease outbreaks than many medieval cities centuries later. Clean water from aqueducts, efficient waste removal, and relatively decent public hygiene kept many plagues at bay, until the empire started collapsing and no one was left to maintain the system. Even now, in this part of the tunnel, you see signs of that maintenance. Brick patches, reinforcement beams, even ancient graffiti. One reads, "Marcus was here. Smelled terrible." Okay, probably not exactly that, but the sentiment was likely the same. And for a quirky twist, did you know that Roman doctors sometimes used sewer steam as part of therapy? The idea was that heat rising from the depths of the cloaca could help sweat out toxins. Of course, it probably just gave you a sinus infection, but it's nice to think they were trying. Still, historians debate how much the sanitation system truly contributed to long-term public health. Was it the sewers themselves? The aqueducts? The social rules around cleanliness? The answer is likely a mix of all three. But what's undeniable is that Rome's infrastructure gave it a fighting chance. You slow your steps now as the tunnel opens into a wide chamber, one of the main junctions where the city's waste channels converged before heading out toward the river. The water here is deeper, darker. You hear the echoing splash of something moving just out of sight. No sudden movements. That could be a catfish, or something worse. You light another torch, the previous one having burned low. As the flame flares to life, shadows dance across the walls. Here, the stones bear deep grooves, worn down by thousands of years of rushing water. It's beautiful in a strange, utilitarian way. The architecture is all function, no flourish. Just walls doing their job since before your great-great-great-aunt's aunt was born. You glance upward at the curved vaults of the chamber. Above, hidden behind layers of city life, is the street. Horse carts, merchants, priests, all moving through their day with no idea what's directly beneath them. In a way, this place is the unsung artery of Rome. It never sought fame. It just worked. A breeze flows through from one of the side tunnels. It smells faintly of basil and something metallic. Maybe coins? Someone might have dropped a purse down a great centuries ago. Rome is full of lost things. And just as you're starting to feel somewhat at peace with this eternal current of waste and water, a loud plop echoes from behind you. You turn slowly. Nothing. Just ripples. You keep walking. Faster now. Because being brave in a sewer is fine until the sewer talks back. You continue onward, deeper into the heart of the empire's intestinal tract, marveling not at the marble monuments above ground, but at the quiet genius flowing beneath them. Because when the Colosseum crumbled, the Cloaca Maxima still ran. When emperors fell, when temples burned, when the Visigoths rode into town and broke everything pretty, this sewer kept going. It still does. The smell hits you before the view does. Not worse, just different. Earthier, wetter. You're getting close to the Tiber River, Rome's eternal artery. But for the Romans, it wasn't just the source of life. It was also, rather unceremoniously, the end of the line. All roads may lead to Rome, but all sewers? They flow to the Tiber. As you round a bend in the Cloaca Maxima, the low ceiling lifts once more, and a watery light begins to reflect off the walls. You've made it to one of the tunnel's final outflows, a wide stone throat that opens directly into the Tiber's sluggish current. Here, waste from every district, marketplaces, bathhouses, barracks, and homes merges into one final, glorious stream of, let's call it, civic exhale. The Cloaca Maxima, you realize, wasn't just a local sewer. It was a central collector, a digestive tract for the entire city, if you're feeling brave enough for that metaphor. And you're standing at the rear exit. You approach the opening carefully. A wide arch looms before you, slick with centuries of damp. From here, Rome's waste poured directly into the river. Day after day, year after year, emperor after emperor. The Tiber carried it all downstream, away from the city. Out of sight, out of smell. Mostly, the riverbank, even in ancient times, was no pristine waterfront. Fish flopped lazily in water that glimmered with oil and drifted with scraps. Small docks lined the banks, and workers, called latrinals, or in less formal Latin, those guys who deal with the gross stuff, kept a wary eye on the flow, especially during storms, because storms were trouble. When it rained hard, the Cloaca Maxima would flood, fast. Instead of taking waste out, it sometimes brought it back in. Imagine your street suddenly becoming a brown canal, and you're ankle deep in what your upstairs neighbor had for dinner 2 nights ago. Historians still argue whether the Romans had an effective overflow strategy for the sewer system. Some say they relied on strategically placed runoff tunnels. Others believe the occasional backflow was just an accepted part of urban living. Either way, when it poured, the Tiber roared, and the city scrambled. Now you stand there, watching the water glide past, murky and endless. You remember that this river, sacred and practical, was central to the Roman imagination. Romulus and Remus floated down it in their mythic basket. Trade ships glided up it with African grain and Egyptian papyrus. And every single day, the Tiber drank from the Cloaca Maxima's mouth without complaint. Well, except during summer, because summer brought heat, and heat brought fermentation. Imagine this, it's July. Rome is sweltering. The city stinks. The sewer gurgles angrily as it processes gallons of tepid bathwater and spoiled food. The Tiber is barely moving. Everything starts to stew. The smell rises like a slow, invisible ghost. People fan themselves. Priests burn incense. Bakers whisper curses. And somewhere, someone falls ill from water they thought was clean. See, not everyone in Rome understood the concept of upstream versus downstream. The poor, in particular, drew water directly from the river near the outflow points of the sewers. To us, it's unthinkable. To them, it was Tuesday. The elite, of course, had aqueduct-fed cisterns. Filtered, fresh, controlled. Yet even then, not all fountains were safe. Some were fed by recycled water, drainage diverted and reused, especially during droughts. Did that stop people from bathing or washing fruit in it? Not really. And this is where the Tiber's role gets murky. It wasn't just a river. It was a dumping ground. Everything went in. Everything. Garbage. Corpses. Dead animals. Unwanted statues. Broken weapons. Criminals' remains. Some executions even ended with a casual toss into the current. Not the cleanest justice system, but efficient. And the Cloaca Maxima was the delivery boy. Fun fact, archaeologists have dredged the riverbed and found thousands of coins, tossed in as offerings to river gods, or just lost in the daily scramble. Also found? Skeletons, amulets, pottery shards. One team even discovered an entire shipwreck buried beneath layers of sewer sediment, right next to an outflow tunnel. Historians still argue whether it was sunk during a storm or just abandoned when it started smelling too bad to salvage. You watch the water rush past and think of everything that has flowed through this exact spot. Centuries of waste and worship, the detritus of emperors and slaves, rich banquets and rotting vegetables, love letters tossed in despair, chamber pots dumped with attitude, bones of animals sacrificed to gods whose names we've forgotten. There's a rhythm to it all. Not pretty, not poetic, but real. Rome didn't run on beauty alone. It ran on flow. And while the Cloaca Maxima might not be carved on triumphal arches or etched into marble reliefs of military glory, it may be the most Roman thing in existence. Practical, durable, slightly terrifying, still working after 2.5 millennia. You take a few more steps forward. The air is cooler here, fresher, relatively speaking. There's a breeze from the river. Somewhere above, the city is alive with dinner smells, street musicians, and tired sandals dragging home. But down here, it's just you, the stone, and the current. You turn back from the outflow arch, heading inward again. The tunnel welcomes you like an old friend, grimy, but reliable. You've seen the exit, but the story isn't done. Not yet, because Rome didn't just worship gods of war and wine. It worshipped sanitation. You step back from the river's edge, letting the familiar damp of the tunnel wrap around you once more like a musty, slightly moist blanket. As you walk, the sounds of the Tiber fade behind you, replaced again by the muffled, ancient symphony of drips, echoes, and distant trickles. You're deeper into the belly of the Cloaca Maxima now, and about to meet a god, or rather a goddess. She doesn't have a temple with grand columns. No golden altar. No daily offerings of doves and wine. She's more niche, and her name is Cloacina, divine patroness of Rome's sewer system. You can't help but smirk. Rome really did have a god or goddess for everything. You pass a low stone alcove in the tunnel wall, just big enough for a small statue. It's empty now, the figure long lost to time or looters, but centuries ago, this could have been a shrine to Cloacina herself. Romans were practical, but they weren't above spiritual insurance policies. If you had to crawl through raw sewage to unclog a drain beneath the forum, you'd pray too. According to legend, Cloacina started as a minor water deity, perhaps even imported from Etruscan or Sabine beliefs. Later, as the Cloaca Maxima gained importance, so did she, evolving from a nymph-like spirit to a full-blown goddess of purification and sanitation. The name Cloacina literally means the purifier, which is optimistic, considering her realm. But here's the weirdest part. She was also tied to love and marriage. Yes, love and sewers, together. In a confusing twist that even ancient poets struggled to explain, Cloacina became linked to Venus. The result? A hybrid divinity, Venus Cloacina, who reigned over both sacred unions and sacred plumbing. Historians still argue whether this was meant to be symbolic, purity, unions, and cleanliness, or if it was just Rome's cheeky way of acknowledging that both relationships and sewer systems require a lot of maintenance. Above ground, you'd find her tiny shrine near the Roman Forum, perched awkwardly over the original sewer path, probably the only goddess in history whose temple literally stood over flowing waste. The statue, as described in ancient texts, showed her standing demurely, surrounded by small altars and plants. People left offerings there. Not just workers, but lovers, newlyweds, and even lawmakers hoping to clean up Rome's politics. Subtle. You slow your pace and let your hand trail the wall, imagining the workers who'd stop here mid-shift, wiping their brow, whispering a quick prayer. Please no more rats today. Please no more sandals lost to the current. Please let it be a quiet shift. The Romans believed the divine lived in all parts of their world. The fire in the hearth, the water in the bath, the hinges of doors, the fields, the shadows. So why not the sewer, too? And Cloacina wasn't just spiritual. She was symbolic. Her presence meant the Romans acknowledged the vital role of sanitation. It wasn't some dirty afterthought, it was sacred. Maintaining the city's flow was an act of civic duty and devotion, which, in a weird way, makes the Cloaca Maxima a sort of living temple. It also had a role in Roman politics. During the Republic, it was said that coins were tossed into the sewer as ritual offerings, especially before major public works projects. Senators gave speeches atop platforms built near its entrance. Philosophers used it in metaphors. Pliny the Elder once marveled at how the sewer receives all and still remains clean, clearly never having visited during the summer months. And speaking of politics, remember the shrine to Cloacina? That spot near the Forum was also the scene of some questionable negotiations. There's a story, probably apocryphal, that two opposing Roman politicians once met by the goddess's shrine to cut a deal in private, reasoning that no one would follow us into the sewer, which, if true, is both brilliant and disgusting. As you walk further, you notice a change in the air. The tunnel curves again, and up ahead, the stone appears whiter, cleaner. You're entering a section that was likely scrubbed more regularly, perhaps because it was closer to Cloacina's domain. Or maybe it's just wishful thinking. Regardless, it smells less offensive. For now, you stop near a stone block that juts from the wall, bearing a faint inscription. It's almost worn away, but a few letters are still visible. The rest is lost to time, erosion, and possibly rat nibbling. But it's likely part of a dedication, maybe from a worker, maybe a minor official, maybe a love-struck cleaner trying to impress both a goddess and a girl. And you have to wonder, did Cloacina really protect people down here? Did she ward off collapse? Blockages? Did she bless the sponge sticks? Maybe. Or maybe she was a comforting thought in a world where the sewer could literally swallow you whole. One last oddity. In the later empire, Cloacina's cult faded, but her name lingered. Medieval maps still marked parts of the sewer as Cloacina's path. In 18th century excavations, one scholar misread her as a Roman version of Hecate, goddess of magic and crossroads. So now, in a few obscure books, you'll find Cloacina listed among deities of the underworld. Honestly, it tracks. You move on again, feet slapping softly against the damp stone. The light from your torch flickers against walls stained with smoke, soot, and centuries of unspeakable effort. But somewhere in the dark, among the rats, the roots, and the steady echo of water, a goddess once listened. And maybe she still does. The air thickens, not just with moisture, but with that specific kind of historical weight that smells like wet limestone, old iron, and existential dread. You press forward into a tighter section of the Cloaca Maxima. Here, the tunnel narrows, its arch lower, the walls clammy with time. This isn't the showpiece stretch built for emperors to admire from bridges. This is the working-class sewer, the quiet part. The maintenance corridor. You crouch a little as you walk. Your shoulders brush the walls now. The sound of dripping water grows louder. Not dramatic, just insistent, like the slow ticking of a clock that forgot how to stop. And just up ahead, lodged into the wall at an awkward angle, is something you didn't expect to see. A battered bronze tool. Half a handle, maybe once part of a rake or a scraper, left behind by a fuller, one of Rome's dirtiest but essential professions. Let's talk about them. You've heard of blacksmiths and gladiators, but the fullers were the bleach lords of the Roman world. Their job? Washing togas, and not in a lovely bubbling brook with lavender soap. No, they washed clothes with urine. Yes, that's correct. Human urine. You see, the ammonia in pee makes for a surprisingly effective degreasing agent. So fullers collected it, sometimes from public urinals, sometimes from collection pots. Then they stomped it into garments in huge stone vats. Think of it like ancient dry cleaning, except wetter and uglier. The cleaned garments, freshly soaked in the city's best ammonia, were often rinsed in water channels connected to, you guessed it, the Cloaca Maxima. So, in an indirect but meaningful way, the sewer helped keep Rome's fashion elite slightly less grimy. You wonder what it must have been like to be a fuller, spending your days ankle-deep in fabric and fluids. Most were freedmen, former slaves turned tradesmen. The work was low status but lucrative. Philonici, the laundries, operated like mini-factories. Some even had signage, "Togas cleaned while you wait," with a silent, "but you might regret it," in small print. And the sewer? It was their partner in crime. Wastewater from rinsing tubs drained straight into it. This part of the cloaca is probably coated with layers of toga residue, leather softening runoff, and the effluvium of Rome's textile industry. You stoop lower as a pipe juts out above you. It's old lead, possibly. The Romans used lead piping all over the city. Historians still argue whether this contributed to widespread lead poisoning, or whether the high calcium content in the water created a protective lining inside the pipes. One theory says the upper classes, who had more exposure to piped water, suffered cognitive decline because of it. Another says that's a myth and Roman emperors were just naturally unhinged. Either way, the pipes fed everything. Not just fountains and homes, but the laundries, the baths, and the sewers. It was a delicate, if slightly gross, ballet of intake and outflow. And you're standing in the final act. Another few steps and the stone underfoot changes. It's smoother here, worn by centuries of water, but also scrubbed manually. This area might have served as a cleaning station for tools, for workers, maybe even for animals. Some reports suggest that donkeys were used to turn large wheels that agitated laundry vats. Picture a confused donkey standing in a circle, forever walking, surrounded by the smell of old socks and urine. Honestly, same energy as most office jobs. And just there, in a side alcove, is something special. A faint fresco. Most of it's flaked away, lost to damp and time, but you can just make out a pair of sandals and what looks like a toga? A comedic mask? Maybe it once showed a fuller's shop in caricature. Maybe it was just a warning. Don't step here unless you're ready to ruin your shoes. You pause. You imagine the rhythm of those workshops. The slap of wet fabric. The splash of rinsing. The growled complaints. The muffled laughter. A slave muttering under their breath. A manager hollering about stains. A customer sniffing a toga and pretending it smells fine. This wasn't glamorous, but it kept the city turning. In fact, in terms of public health, fullers might have been quietly heroic. Dirty clothes mean disease. And in a city that sometimes held over 1 million people, the ability to cycle out sweaty togas was no small thing. The social status, though, questionable. Romans admired cleanliness, but they didn't necessarily admire the people who produced it. Much like today's janitors or waste workers, crucial but underappreciated. Still, fullers formed guilds, had processions. Some got rich, others just got respiratory infections. You sidestep a suspicious puddle and follow a narrower offshoot of the tunnel. Smells worse here. Acidic, biting. The chemical ghosts of ancient cleaning agents? Possibly. Or maybe just something died recently. Hard to say. A rusted hook dangles from a ceiling beam. Maybe it held buckets or tools or... Well, let's hope it was buckets. This entire hidden world underpins the Roman surface life you know so well. Emperors in gleaming robes, marble forums, triumphs and speeches and poetry, all maintained in part by people who stomped in urine for a living. And the Cloaca Maxima took it all. The wastewater, the runoff, the residue. It absorbed Rome's glamour and its grime with equal indifference. You trace a hand along the wall again, passing another worn inscription. It's less formal, maybe a graffito. It says something like, Felix est abluit. Happy is he who washes. Could be a joke. Could be sarcasm. Could be some ancient laundry worker reminding himself, at least I'm not in the arena. The corridor begins to widen again, gently. The ceiling lifts, offering you breathing room. The air clears a bit, and as you step forward into this newer, cleaner part of the passage, you realize something. You're not just walking through a sewer. You're walking through an ecosystem, a life support system, a backstage tour of an empire that lived fast, dressed well, and flushed everything downhill. The tunnel widens again, finally. You straighten up, your back giving a grateful crack, and breathe in a cool gust of air. It's faintly metallic, with a mossy undertone, almost crisp. If sewer air could ever be described as refreshing, this might be it. You're now in a grander section of the Cloaca Maxima. The stones here are larger, more uniform, set with the kind of deliberate craftsmanship you've come to associate with the wealthier parts of ancient Rome. Not flashy. Rome saved its marble and mosaics for the baths and forums, but solid, expensive, intentional. That's because this part of the sewer didn't just serve public latrines or laundries. It serviced private homes. Very private homes. You're in patrician territory now. Imagine the hills of ancient Rome, like the Palatine, where the elite built villas with views of the city and the Tiber River. Beneath those villas were hidden arteries like this one, running waste from kitchens, fountains, and private toilets right into the Cloaca Maxima. The patricians didn't want to see or smell their refuse. They wanted it gone, quietly, efficiently, out of sight, out of toga, and they paid for that privilege. Indoor plumbing in Rome was a status symbol, a literal pipeline to convenience. Some rich homes had private baths, elaborate fountains, and flush toilets, well, sort of flush. Water from aqueduct-fed cisterns would wash waste away through ceramic or lead pipes. Many of those pipes, like the one you're now ducking under, fed directly into this ancient sewer. It's easy to assume Rome was all public latrines and communal sponges. But for the 1%, life was much cleaner, at least on the surface. Historians still debate how widespread true private plumbing was. Was it common among all elites or just the ultra-rich? Were homes retrofitted over time, or were some built with sewer hookups from the start? Some say only a few dozen villas had full-service bathrooms. Others argue it was more like hundreds. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, buried in the archaeology we haven't yet uncovered. You glance down at the stone channel beside your path. A groove, cut deep and smoothed by water. This is where those villa pipelines joined the main sewer. You can almost picture a toga-clad noble pacing overhead, completely unaware that their leftovers and leavings were cascading beneath their sandals. And maybe they liked it that way. The sewer was the silent servant, the unseen laborer. As long as the water flowed and the air stayed sweet, nobody asked questions. And if something went wrong, if a pipe cracked or a drain backed up, well, that's what slaves and sewer workers were for. You pass another side tunnel, narrow, crumbling, filled with debris. It might have once led to a specific villa's outflow, now collapsed. A little monument to upper-class hygiene. Of course, not everyone had access to this luxury. Most Romans used public toilets, shared bathhouses, and hoped it didn't rain during their morning commute. Some tenement buildings, insulae, had no plumbing at all. Their residents might dump waste in alleyways, or toss it from windows into the street, despite laws against it. The rich, however, they hired builders to route waste under their homes. Entire mini-sewer systems, leading to this central artery. This made the Cloaca Maxima not just a sewer, but a symbol of class division. The elite's waste disappeared silently. The pores lingered. The pipe just ahead is a marvel. It's ancient ceramic, rimmed with calcified minerals, but still solid. Water trickles through it. Not a rush, but a polite trickle. A patrician's ghost flush. You imagine someone 2,000 years ago, sighing contentedly after using their personal lavatory, pulling a chain or pouring a jug of water, and never once considering where it went. Well, it went here. There's even evidence that some aristocratic homes had primitive grease traps. Sections of pipe or channel that slowed down waste and separated the solids from the liquids. It's a level of engineering that's both impressive and kind of gross. But the goal was clear. Avoid clogging the shared sewer and keep that patrician lifestyle flowing smoothly. You shine your light on a carved emblem set into the tunnel wall. It's faint, worn by time, but still visible. A stylized dolphin, possibly a decorative marker left by a builder, or maybe the signature of a specific construction crew. It's hard to imagine contractors tagging their work in the sewer, but hey, pride in plumbing runs deep. Speaking of depth, you're now several meters below street level. Above your head are layers of history, modern Rome, medieval Rome, imperial Rome. And in this moment, you're moving through a level reserved for only the most privileged bodily functions. It's oddly humbling, isn't it? Even emperors had to poop. Even senators needed their bathwater drained. Even Cleopatra, if she ever visited Rome, and let's be real, she probably brought her own toilet seat, relied on systems like this. The rich had the privacy, the plumbing, the perfumed oils, but when it came time to hit the flush, they needed the Cloaca Maxima just like everyone else. And that was the power of Roman engineering. It served everyone. Not equally, sure, but universally. Even if your villa had the fanciest marble toilet, it still relied on these dark, damp tunnels. You pause near an arched niche carved into the stone. Maybe it once held a small offering, a terracotta lamp, a charm against clogs, or even a coin tossed for luck. Some superstitious nobles believed sewer spirits could cause illness if displeased. Better safe than sorry. The ceiling drips again. A soft plop into a shallow puddle. You step over it, careful not to slip, and carry on. The tunnel ahead glows faintly from a shaft of borrowed light. An air vent or collapsed grate letting in the day above. Somewhere up there, tourists sip espresso in sidewalk cafes. A Vespa zips by. A dog barks at a pigeon. But down here, you're with the ancients, following the quiet path of wealth, privilege, and very sophisticated flushing. And now, as you take a final glance back at the posh section of this ancient sewer, you realize this was more than architecture. It was control. The ability to manage waste, to make it disappear, was power. The patricians didn't just want to look clean. They wanted to live as though filth didn't exist. Lucky for them, the Cloaca Maxima had their back side. Your footsteps echo differently now. The floor beneath you is more uneven, slick in patches, worn in others, and the air has shifted. It's heavier here, warmer, like something old is breathing slowly out of the stones. You're moving deeper into the underbelly now, and this stretch isn't maintained for tourism or grandeur. This is where Rome's real heroes went to work. You know, the sewer workers. Picture it. You're a laborer in ancient Rome, not a soldier, not a philosopher, not even a mosaic artisan. You're a cloacrum purgator, literally, a sewer cleaner. You wake up early, eat a hunk of bread, grab a torch, a shovel, maybe a long stick with a hook, and descend into darkness. Not for glory, not for applause, but because someone has to keep the world from backing up into chaos. These workers were sometimes slaves, sometimes freedmen, occasionally municipal employees paid a small wage by the city. Always overlooked, often underpaid, definitely underappreciated. Yet without them, the great city of Rome would have drowned in its own waste. The walls close in here. You duck instinctively as you pass through a narrow choke point. Moss oozes down from a crack, trickling like a slow, green tear. This tunnel hasn't seen a torch-bearing worker in centuries. And yet, you can feel them. The ghosts of their labor cling to the stones like sweat. Back in the day, Sewer workers cleared blockages, flushed debris, and inspected structural damage. Sometimes they'd be called in when smells rose too high in upper-class homes, when a patrician's villa started to stink, and no amount of incense would mask the truth. Imagine being summoned by a toga-clad noble. "Excuse me, good man, my atrium smells of fermented eel guts. Please do something." So down they'd go, into this, with only oil lamps and basic tools. You step over a small pile of ancient rubble, possibly collapsed stonework, possibly a cleverly disguised spot where someone once hid from a particularly angry rat. And that's no joke. Roman sewers were full of rats, snakes, stray cats, and once, reportedly, even a crocodile. Historians still argue whether that last one is myth, but given how Rome used to import exotic animals for the Colosseum, a sewer crocodile doesn't feel that far-fetched, does it? The sewer workers knew the risks. They navigated rising water, methane buildup, sudden cave-ins, disease, and encounters with very startled rodents. And yet, they kept coming, day after day, because if they didn't, the whole system failed. You come upon an old ladder bolted into the stone. It's rusted, slick with algae, leading up into shadow. Maybe this once connected to a manhole. Picture a worker climbing out, covered in grime, blinking in the Roman sun, holding up a soggy sandal someone flushed during a house party. Another day at the office. They weren't just cleaners, they were engineers in their own right. They knew the layout better than any senator. Some of them probably mapped this labyrinth in their heads. They patched leaks, redirected flows, and invented makeshift tools on the spot. The job was half strength, half improvisation. And no, they didn't get statues. That honor went to generals and gods. The sewer workers? They got respiratory problems. And probably a pretty decent fear of enclosed spaces. You slide past a collapsed alcove. Inside, your flashlight catches a pile of what looks like bricks and bones? Don't worry, it's animal. Most likely. Archaeologists have found butchered remains in sewer offshoots before, dumped by cooks too lazy to walk to the river. And guess who had to clean that up? Still, every so often, the city did recognize these workers. Inscriptions mention a small brotherhood of laborers who worked the sewers under contract, Collegia Cloacarum. They even had feast days. Imagine a banquet honoring sewer maintenance, with a big roasted pig and everyone clapping for the guy who unclogged the forum's drain last month. Heartwarming, really. Some workers, particularly in later periods, left marks behind. Graffiti scratched into the walls, doodles of faces or gladiators, maybe even jokes. You spot one now, just ahead. A scratched image of what looks like a man holding a long stick. It's hard to say what it meant. Maybe it was just a guy proud of his stick. Maybe it's an ancient meme. We'll never know. That's the thing about these unsung heroes, they didn't leave journals. Their work was physical, thankless, and vital, and invisible by design. Today, you can still find their echoes. Tools discovered in drainage channels, fingerprints in clay bricks, soot from their lamps baked into tunnel ceilings. They were here, keeping the eternal city running. And as you step into a wider chamber, just a holding basin, long since dried, you imagine one of them resting here, torch guttering low, sipping stale water from a skin, catching a moment's breath before wading into the next sludge-clogged challenge. No medals, no monuments, just the knowledge that Rome, in all its marble and gold, stayed standing because someone was willing to shovel out the filth. And maybe that's the real backbone of civilization. People willing to do the gross jobs, the behind-the-scenes labor, the quiet, murky work that keeps the fountains flowing and the nobles happy and the baths smelling faintly of lavender instead of other things. You linger here for a moment, honoring their invisible legacy, listening to the slow drip of history around you, breathing in the musty air that once carried the breath of the people who kept Rome from drowning in itself. Then you press onward, deeper still, into the next bend. Let's just hope no one flushed a crocodile ahead. You shuffle forward, ducking beneath a low arch that forces you to practically crawl for a few feet. And then, just as your knees start to ache, the tunnel widens into a squat chamber. You stand again, stretch your back, and take in the new space. It's darker here, quieter. Still, Too quiet. Suddenly, a faint, wet plop echoes in the distance. Another drip. But what was that before it? You freeze for a moment, remembering one of the more colorful stories whispered in historical circles, about when the Roman sewer system fought back. See, for all their genius engineering and careful calculations, the Romans sometimes underestimated one little problem: gas. Not politics, not gossip. No, we're talking actual methane gas. When organic matter, say, an entire city's worth of spoiled food, waste, dead animals, and, let's be honest, who knows what else, sits festering in a poorly ventilated space, gases build. And under the right conditions, those gases ignite. Historians still argue whether a specific explosion ever occurred in the Cloaca Maxima, but there are scattered reports. One fragment describes a great shaking beneath the forum, followed by a fireball that supposedly startled temple-goers mid-sacrifice. Was it an underground gas explosion? Was it a sewer flash? Was it exaggerated? Who can say? But you're not about to light a torch down here and find out. The ancient engineers did try to account for this. The Cloaca Maxima had vents, stone shafts leading up to street level, often disguised in street mosaics or hidden in alleys. These allowed noxious gases to escape, unless, of course, someone blocked them up or built over them, which happened a lot. Imagine renovating your villa, not knowing you just sealed off a methane vent, and then your courtyard gets unexpectedly spicy one afternoon. You keep walking, your steps careful. The floor here shows signs of fire damage. Ancient soot smudges high on the walls, blackened streaks that no amount of rain has washed away. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe this was one of the spots where things got a little explosive. Roman writers were aware of the risks. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, mentions the danger of igniting certain sewer vapors. He warns of sudden and violent exhalations in enclosed places. That's Roman for "don't strike a match down there, genius." You glance up and notice a crack running through the ceiling stones. Earthquakes were another problem. Rome, though not sitting directly on a fault line, did experience tremors. A quake combined with a gas leak? Not a good day for the neighbors. One Roman satirist joked that only fools build temples near sewer mouths. But the joke's on them because the Cloaca Maxima passed right under some of the most sacred spots in the city. The Forum, the temples of Venus and Roma, even the house of the Vestal Virgins. All of it balanced on a pipework system that, if upset, could belch forth more than just bad smells. And let's not forget the story of Emperor Elagabalus. Now, Elagabalus was, unique. Historians still debate whether he was wildly eccentric or completely unhinged. But one tale sticks out. He supposedly had a banquet hall rigged so that during feasts, rose petals would rain from the ceiling. Once, he released so many petals that guests reportedly suffocated. Now imagine that same engineering ingenuity used below ground, trapdoors, chambers, pipes redirected for dramatic effect. Some speculate that portions of the sewer system were used in palace tricks, maybe even as hidden routes for servants or secret messages. And with that in mind, maybe the occasional sewer incident wasn't always accidental. You pass by another narrowing and step over a broken tile. Embedded in the wall nearby is what looks like a clay pipe, maybe a drain from an upper street. It's cracked, leaking. As it drips, you wonder, what exactly is this tunnel made of? The original Cloaca Maxima began as a simple open-air trench, lined with stone and gradually roofed over by archways. Over centuries, it was reinforced with brick and concrete, extended with barrel vaults and cross-channels. The end result? A bizarre, winding patchwork of materials, smells, and ancient architectural ambition. And that ambition sometimes caused problems. Roman concrete, called opus cementitium, was legendary, but not always gas-proof. In fact, the lime in it could react with certain waste materials, contributing to heat buildup. Add in high summer temperatures, little airflow, and, boom. Of course, not all explosions were literal. Sometimes the blow-ups were political. When sewers backed up, the public complained. And when the public complained, emperors were expected to fix things. Sewer reforms became political talking points. Some emperors sponsored repairs just to win popularity. Others, like Domitian, allegedly ignored the sewage problem, leading to unrest and, eventually, protest graffiti like "Rome stinks while Caesar drinks." You pause under a circular vent. Looking up, you can just make out a sliver of daylight far above, a pinhole of sun. You imagine a street above bustling with sandals and carts and loud, market-shouting vendors. No one up there knows you're down here. And back in the day, most Romans didn't know the danger right beneath their feet. You walk on, and then, rounding a curve, you stumble upon something jarringly modern. A bit of soot-covered scaffolding. Maybe from a 19th century inspection. Because yes, even in modern times, the Cloaca Maxima still breathes. Italian engineers have mapped and entered its deepest veins. Some sections still functional, some sealed off. In one 1800s expedition, a team reported hearing an unnatural rush of air, followed by the sudden extinguishing of their lamps. They scrambled out coughing and drenched in sweat. Historians still debate what caused it. Just a shift in pressure? Or something left over, deep in the tunnels, still waiting for a spark? You pull your collar over your nose, whether to block the smell or just out of superstition. Either way, you've made it through this dangerous stretch. No explosions, no fireballs, no ancient crocodiles combusting mid-yawn. But you're not done yet. Ahead lies the evidence of everything flushed, lost, and buried, the artifacts that tell the story of those who lived above and used this place below. So take a breath carefully and press forward. Just watch where you step. You never know what really happened in these tunnels. Your footsteps slosh softly now, the floor slightly wetter than before, though not alarmingly so. It's as if the very tunnel is easing you into the strangest part of the journey, the part where the Cloaca Maxima stops being just a sewer and becomes something of a museum. One that smells faintly of decay and disappointment, but a museum nonetheless. Archaeologists, brave and questionably compensated, have spent years poking around in Rome's ancient plumbing. Their findings? An absolutely bizarre and oddly moving collection of trash, tools, treasures, and tragic little losses. It turns out that what the Romans flushed or dropped, or tried very hard to forget, has become a breadcrumb trail into their lives. Take, for instance, the sandals. Multiple sandals. Children's sandals. Adult sandals. Left feet without rights. Rights without lefts. Some are leather, others wood-soled. One still bears the faint outline of a maker's stamp. A tiny dolphin, swimming beneath a loop of Latin script. Did someone kick off their shoes at the public baths and forget them? Did a sandal slip through a drain grate during a rainstorm? Or, more dramatic, did someone flee a crime scene and lose it in the chase? Historians still argue whether these sandals were simply lost or deliberately thrown away. The presence of some pairs suggests disposal, but the solo sandals suggest accidental loss. Or maybe ancient Rome had a spontaneous version of the single sock phenomenon. You pass a cluster of rusted objects displayed behind a transparent barrier, part of a preservation effort. A bronze ring, a snapped stylus used for writing on wax tablets, what looks suspiciously like a tiny iron key, all of them recovered from the muck beneath Rome's noble feet. And then, the weirder stuff begins. Animal bones, lots of them, pigs, dogs, chickens, and one crocodile. Yes, a crocodile, or at least parts of one, possibly from a private menagerie, possibly a religious offering. Possibly just one of those don't ask moments in Roman history. You try not to imagine someone walking an angry crocodile through the forum, only to lose control as it lunges into a drainage hole. Beside the bones, tiny charms and amulets lie carefully arranged. Eyes made of glass, miniature phalluses carved from ivory, tiny hands clenched into protective gestures. The Romans believed in apotropaic magic, the idea that little symbols could ward off evil. Apparently, they dropped a fair number of these down the drain. Whether accidentally or on purpose is, you guessed it, still debated. One particular item makes you pause. A carved gemstone, likely a ring intaglio, depicting Venus combing her hair. It's beautiful even under the layer of grime. Who lost it? Was it a lover's gift that slipped off during a bathhouse visit? A family heirloom that fell through a grate in a moment of carelessness? Or was it stolen and discarded by a thief with suddenly cold feet? You don't just find trinkets here. You find insight into what people valued enough to carry, careless enough to lose, and human enough to regret. A little further along, you're shown what the archaeologists call sacrifice deposits. Not dramatic altars, but simple clusters of items deliberately placed in the sewer system. Coins, cracked pottery, bits of burned grain. These were offerings, likely to Cloacina or other chthonic deities, to ask for purification, protection, or just better plumbing. Some of these deposits are accompanied by inscriptions scratched onto lead tablets. Curses, actually. Pleas for revenge against cheating lovers or rival bakers or noisy neighbors. You read one aloud in a whisper. May Marcus never bake good bread again, and may his fire be forever cold. Harsh words in a city obsessed with fresh loaves. Historians still argue whether these curses were part of official religious rites or just cathartic sewer venting. Either way, the Cloaca Maxima caught it all: dreams, grudges, shoes, and all. You come upon one of the more mysterious finds. A human skull. No body. No explanation. Dated to the late Republican period. Perhaps a burial disturbed by sewer expansion. Perhaps something darker. No marks of trauma, but also no comforting context. Just a silent, watching face from 2,000 years ago, half buried in calcified sludge. More curious still is the little bronze toy horse found beside it. Was it unrelated? Or was this someone's child? A memory reduced to mud and metal? The silence in this part of the tunnel deepens as if it, too, mourns or wonders. It's easy to forget, in all the clever engineering and cheeky graffiti, that Rome was a living, breathing place filled with people. And nothing preserves the reality of that quite like what they accidentally left behind. The Cloaca Maxima didn't just carry waste. Collected secrets. And those secrets kept coming centuries after the height of empire. Even during the medieval period, people continued to use parts of the old system. Not always for sewage, sometimes just as convenient passageways. And so newer layers of detritus lie above the older ones. Coins minted under Charlemagne, a rusted crusader belt buckle, and even a wooden dice cup from around the 14th century. Because, apparently, Roman sewers make great gambling dens if you're bold and desperate enough. You pause beside a pile of cracked amphora shards. These once held olive oil, wine, or fermented fish sauce. One still smells faintly like something you'd never, ever want to taste. Most likely, these were tossed in by workers cleaning out shops or stalls. Easier to dump them down a street drain than carry them across town, especially if they already stank. Finally, you reach a quiet recess, half-walled off with scaffolding and rope. Inside, a small group of archaeologists once found over 200 objects in a single excavation season. Some mundane, some touching. A child's doll, a woman's hairpin, a merchant's seal stamp, all of them unremarkable to the world above, but precious in the underworld of memory. You step back and continue your slow walk. And then, without warning, you're struck by a sudden, absurd thought. All these artifacts, all this history, filtered through centuries of human waste. What the museums polish and display now was once floating in what Romans politely called excreta. There's a strange humility to that. A reminder that even empires flush their legacy eventually. That even greatness, after enough time, becomes sediment. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just a sewer. It was a vault, a diary, a lost and found box for a civilization too busy conquering the world to keep track of its sandals. And in some ways, that's oddly comforting. You walk on, deeper into the tunnel of forgotten things, knowing there are still stories waiting in the sludge. The air is thicker here, not with moisture, but with implication. You've passed sandals, curses, and amulets. Now you're about to wade into something truly enduring: politics. Because if there's one thing more persistent than sewage in ancient Rome, it's political maneuvering. And yes, even the Cloaca Maxima has been swept up in it. Sometimes literally. You might imagine that Roman politicians stood proudly on marble steps debating philosophy, law, and justice. And they did. But just as often, they were down here, well, maybe not personally, using public infrastructure like this to win favor, score points, and reinforce the idea that Rome was the greatest thing since sliced Well, Rome didn't slice bread. They broke it. But you get the idea. It begins with the kings. Legend tells us that the Cloaca Maxima was first constructed under Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, one of Rome's last kings. And sure, he may have started it for practical reasons, flood control, sanitation, but it was also a massive flex. Building a monumental sewer showed that Rome was no longer just a cluster of huts on 7 hills. It was a city worthy of stone, sweat, and the kind of underground engineering that made your rivals squirm with envy. Later, in the Republican era, expanding and maintaining the sewer became a matter of political credit. If you were a censor, one of those elite officials responsible for public morals and, yes, public works, commissioning a major sewer repair project meant your name would literally be carved into the infrastructure. Forever. Or at least until erosion stepped in. Some of those stone inscriptions still exist. One, found along a branch line of the Cloaca Maxima, reads something like, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, during his aedileship, saw to the cleaning of the sewers. It's not exactly a thrilling resume entry, but back then, it meant you were looking out for the people. Even if that meant getting elbow-deep in latrine budgets. Historians still argue whether sewer maintenance was genuinely motivated by civic pride or just an easy way to curry favor before elections. Probably both. Either way, by the time the emperors rolled in, things got even more performative. Take Augustus. The man knew optics. While his enemies fell by the sword, Augustus was busy constructing aqueducts, building roads, and yes, fixing the sewers, all to demonstrate that Rome under his rule was clean, efficient, and literally flowing in the right direction. He may have had statues erected in his honor, but what the people remembered were the working toilets. And that's real legacy. Later emperors followed suit, sometimes going overboard. Emperor Vespasian, for instance, famously instituted a tax on public urinals. The money collected helped maintain the sewer system. When his son Titus complained that it was undignified to profit from bodily functions, Vespasian allegedly held a coin under his nose and asked if it smelled bad. Hence the phrase, pecunia non olet. Money doesn't stink. But it wasn't all glamorous efficiency. Emperors also used sewer projects to distract from scandals. Bread and circuses weren't always enough. Sometimes it had to be bricks and sewers. One notable example is Emperor Domitian. Known for his paranoia and love of spectacle, he also dumped public funds into sewer upgrades right after executing a popular senator. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether the timing was intentional, but many suspect it was a calculated move. Draw the people's eyes to gleaming drains and hope they forget the guillotine. Then there's the religious angle. You remember Cloacina, goddess of the sewer? Turns out she was also leveraged for politics. Politicians erected tiny shrines to her near the forum, not far from where the sewer first opened. One bronze plaque from the early imperial period reads more like a campaign ad than a religious dedication. Offering tribute to Cloacina meant more than spiritual piety. It signaled cleanliness, order, and Roman supremacy over nature. In a society obsessed with symbolism, a clean city meant a clean conscience. Or so they hoped. Even the sewer's very structure became part of Rome's propaganda. You walk now through one of the older vaulted sections. Thick, barrel-shaped stonework, still holding strong. These arches, visible to the occasional visiting dignitary or foreign ambassador, were like subterranean trophies. Rome didn't just conquer land, conquered filth. At one point, the Cloaca Maxima was briefly opened for official tours. Senators and foreign guests were let in, not far, just enough to admire the engineering, then quickly ushered out before the smell became politically inconvenient. You spot a faded inscription on the wall ahead, barely legible but still clinging on, the name of a lesser-known praetor. Beneath it, graffiti in sloppy Latin that says something close to, "He built sewers, not character." Ancient political shade. A reminder that no matter how many bricks you lay, someone always critiques the mortar. But what's truly fascinating is how long this political sewer-wielding persisted. Even during the fall of the Western Roman Empire, maintenance of the Cloaca Maxima was sporadically recorded. Gothic kings, Byzantine officials, and even early popes occasionally commissioned cleanings or minor expansions. Why? Because controlling the sewer wasn't just practical. it was symbolic. Whoever controlled the waste controlled the city. In the Middle Ages, when central authority collapsed and Rome became a shadow of its former self, parts of the Cloaca Maxima were taken over by local warlords or monastic communities. Not just for drainage, but as territorial markers. This sewer mouth belongs to the Order of Saint Sebastian. Imagine drawing your borders with storm grates. And even today, Italian politicians occasionally invoke the Cloaca Maxima when discussing urban development. In 2016, a candidate running for mayor of Rome pledged to bring back the spirit of the Cloaca Maxima. A baffling but oddly poetic promise to restore infrastructure pride. He didn't win, but his campaign slogan, "Rome flows again, no comment. As you round a bend, the passage narrows, and the sound of trickling water returns." A low, echoing hush. Politics and sewage, it seems, have always flowed side by side in this city. One stinks a little less, but only just. And somehow, this all starts to make sense. You're in a civilization where greatness had to be built on something. And if that something happened to be poop, well, at least they made it marble adjacent. You pause for a moment. Somewhere above your head, tourists snap selfies outside the forum. Senators argue on TV. And down here, a sewer keeps whispering the names of those who tried to fix it or use it. You move forward, not quite sure whether you're stepping through history or politics. Probably both. You blink as a sliver of light flickers through the damp dark ahead. Faint, like the ghost of a sunbeam trying to remember how it used to shine here. You've been trudging through centuries of sediment, history, and questionable smells, and now, at last, you're approaching the modern world. You duck beneath a low, mossy arch and step forward carefully, your imaginary sandals squelching just a little less now. The Cloaca Maxima, this ancient Roman marvel of sewer engineering, is still alive, still working, and, unbelievably, still part of the living, breathing infrastructure of modern Rome. Yes, really, you're not just walking through a historical relic. You're inside something that continues to carry waste, water, and runoff under one of the most visited cities on Earth. The same sewer that was first scraped out by Etruscan laborers over 2,500 years ago is still in service today, though with a few updates, of course, like iron grates and modern health inspectors. But here's the thing. Most people walking through the Roman Forum or admiring the nearby Piazza Venezia have no idea what's gurgling just beneath their feet. They might even be sipping a cappuccino, completely unaware that the ghost of Emperor Augustus's plumbing choices is flowing below them. That's Rome for you. A city where history isn't just under your feet, it's in your pipes. You step carefully onto a raised platform, added in the early 20th century to help maintenance crews avoid having to wade directly through. Well, you get it. The stone here is different. Less time-worn, more functional. Still cold to the touch, still echoing each footstep like a whisper. You're standing inside a living artifact, and it's oddly comforting. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima was truly continuous through the centuries or if certain sections collapsed and were later rebuilt. It's likely a bit of both. Rome, as usual, layered its improvements like a millefeuille of marble and mess. There are stretches of the sewer that clearly show medieval reinforcements, patches of Renaissance brickwork, and even some 19th century piping shoved in like a stubborn tourist trying to squeeze into a Roman cafe. But the layout, the heart of the sewer, is largely unchanged. Its main artery still pulses with runoff from modern street drains, rainwater, and yes, some waste, though it's mostly diverted by more modern systems now. Still, during floods or heavy storms, the Cloaca Maxima springs into action like an old warrior waking from a nap. Its channels hiss and gurgle with life. Today, the main outlet of the Cloaca Maxima can be seen if you know where to look. Walk along the Tiber River near the Ponte Palatino, and you'll see it. A large, arched opening beneath the road, still draining runoff into the river just like it did when Julius Caesar was a teenager. The water is dark, a bit murky, and smells faintly of algae and city stress. Tourists might glance at it, assume it's a storm drain, and move on. But you now know it's something much, much older. And you're not the only one who's noticed. Archaeologists, urban planners, and yes, even sewer enthusiasts, they exist, still study the Cloaca Maxima. Every few years, someone proposes a full excavation, or even a museum-style restoration, But Rome, being Rome, has more ruins than funding, and so the sewer remains half forgotten, half functioning, and totally magnificent in its stubbornness. There are urban legends, of course. Some say secret tunnels off the main drain were used by spies or smugglers during the Renaissance. Others claim early Christians fled persecution by hiding in its depths, though historians still argue whether anyone would willingly go down here in a time before rubber boots. One medieval tale insists a thief stashed gold coins inside a side drain and drowned trying to retrieve them, which, let's be honest, is a bad way to go. But perhaps the most curious detail comes from a very real discovery in 1999. While conducting a survey near the ancient temple of Venus and Roma, workers accidentally tapped into a section of the Cloaca Maxima that had been sealed for centuries. Inside, they found remarkably well-preserved wooden debris, pottery shards, and oddly, a large iron key. Just one. Alone. Unlabeled. Scholars speculated endlessly. Was it to a locked bathhouse? A crypt? A very secure public toilet? We may never know. Still, this moment of rediscovery, this sudden exposure of ancient Rome's hidden veins, triggered a renewed wave of curiosity. A few historians even pushed for a formal tour path through the sewer, complete with lighting and handrails. You'll be relieved to know that idea was shelved due to safety concerns. Translation: the smell alone was probably a deal-breaker. And that's the paradox of the Cloaca Maxima. It is both historical monument and utilitarian trench, revered and reviled, worshipped by ancient Romans and mostly ignored by modern ones. Yet it's still there, burbling along underfoot, as constant as traffic noise and espresso machines. You reach a newer maintenance tunnel now, concrete and cleanish, with utility pipes running overhead. A plaque on the wall notes the year 1936, when Mussolini's regime conducted a major cleaning and reinforcement of the Cloaca Maxima. Fascist propaganda posters even boasted that Rome's arteries run clean once again. Of course they did. Dictators love metaphors. Still, the repairs helped preserve key stretches of the sewer, which in turn allowed modern Rome to flourish without quite literally collapsing into its past. And there's something poetic in that, isn't there? That even regimes come and go, but the sewer just keeps going. You lean against a railing for a moment, feeling the weight of it all: history, waste, empire. The Cloaca Maxima doesn't ask for praise. It just endures, quietly, efficiently, eternally Roman. A drop of water echoes in the distance. Somewhere above, a bus rumbles past, entirely unaware, and you, somehow, feel more connected to Rome than any coin tossed into the Trevi fountain ever could offer. You turn back toward the darkness, ready for the final stretch of this most unwanted, unforgettable tour. You squint into the shadowy curve ahead, the final bend of this long, grimy journey. You've sloshed through centuries, ducked under imperial arches, and survived more imaginary smells than any one person should. But here you are, standing at the farthest accessible end of the Cloaca Maxima, and you've almost made it out alive. The stonework narrows here, funneling the ancient sewer into one last dramatic exit. You can hear the soft churn of water tumbling over moss-covered stones, echoing in ripples that stretch far beyond your vision. And that sound, it's not just liquid. It's time dripping, civilization draining gently onward. You exhale, slowly, because this is it. The grand finale of Rome's least romantic tour. The great Roman sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, has no statue in its honor, no grand speech etched in marble, no Latin poetry carved into its walls. But if any monument has earned your respect, this is it. There's a strange beauty to how it all ties together. Every glamorous amphitheater, every forum and palace you've heard about was only possible because of this silent underworld. The Roman Empire didn't just conquer with swords and sandals, it conquered with plumbing. The hidden kind. The kind no one wants to talk about, but absolutely everyone depends on. Back in the day, the very idea of a city of 1 million people functioning without constant outbreaks of disease was revolutionary. And yet, Rome did it largely thanks to infrastructure like this. The Cloaca Maxima helped drain excess rainwater, divert waste, and prevent the kind of stagnation that could bring down even the mightiest marble city. Of course, not everything was as functional as the tourist brochures might claim. Historians still argue whether the sewer actually reached every neighborhood, or if poorer districts were left with open ditches and crossed fingers. Some scholars believe certain suburbs near the Aventine Hill didn't get consistent drainage until late in the empire. Others claim private citizens had to bribe workers to extend sewer lines closer to their homes, which frankly checks out. Bribery has always flowed as freely as wastewater in Rome. But despite its flaws, the sewer became a symbol of Roman engineering genius. A marvel that, like the aqueduct or the road, demonstrated that Rome wasn't just about conquest, it was about sustainability. Well, as sustainable as an empire with weekly gladiator fights and volcanic bathhouses could be. Now, here in this last echoing chamber, you pause, not just to catch your breath, but to take it all in. A single shaft of sunlight pierces the far wall, slipping in through a vent you hadn't noticed. It catches in the fine mist rising off the water and makes the whole tunnel glow just a little, like the sewer itself is exhaling. And you notice something tucked into the corner, a rusted shovel. Not ancient, just old. Forgotten, possibly left by a maintenance worker decades ago. Or maybe it's been waiting for someone like you to pick it up and start digging a little deeper. You're not going to, of course. This is a metaphor. You're tired. You've earned your nap. As you turn around to retrace your steps, you hear the city start to hum again above you. Footsteps clicking across cobblestones, scooters zipping down narrow streets, and church bells echoing across rooftops. All of it kept safe and steady by the quiet work happening underground. You climb slowly back toward the surface, imaginary feet heavy, a little soggy, a little wiser. The passage opens wider now, and the air smells more like street vendors and roasted chestnuts than mildew and clay. You can almost feel the sunlight brushing your face again. One last glance over your shoulder. You see the dark tunnel winding off, coiling into itself like a tired old serpent. The Cloaca Maxima. You made it. You survived the tour you didn't ask for, and now you can tell people that you learned something new about ancient Rome that they most definitely didn't want to hear over dinner. But weirdly, you're grateful. Because now, when someone marvels at the Colosseum or gushes about ancient emperors, you'll know that beneath all the grandeur was a sewer. And somehow that makes it all feel more real, more human, more flushed with history. You step out of the cool darkness, blinking into the golden light of a Roman afternoon. Now let's wind things down. And now, as you leave the depths of the ancient Cloaca Maxima behind, let your mind grow quieter, your breath a little slower. Picture the cool, worn stone beneath your fingers, the gentle hush of water echoing in a tunnel that's outlived empires, revolutions, and centuries of change. Still flows soft, patient, constant. You're not walking anymore, just floating now, through memory and mist, through layers of time that press softly against each other like the folds of an old book. Above you, Rome goes on. Its chaos, its beauty, its traffic and espresso and chattering tourists. But here, beneath it all, it's quiet, still, safe. Let that calmness settle over you. The tunnels curve into darkness, fading into ancient dreams and forgotten whispers. You've walked where few imagine walking, beneath monuments and marble, through a hidden lifeline that once carried the waste of the world's greatest empire. And somehow, in the dim, cool air and dripping shadows, there was something peaceful, something real. Let that peacefulness wrap around you now like a soft blanket. Breathe in, slowly. Let it out gently. There's no rush to reach the surface. The city will still be there when you wake. For now, rest in the rhythm of ancient water, steady and eternal. Close your eyes. You've survived Roman plumbing. Sleep well.